I sat at my small kitchen table in Montclair, the early morning light filtering through the blinds and dust motes dancing in the air. In my hand was a chipped ceramic mug, a wedding gift from Lizette 10 years ago, still stained from too many late-night coffees. I lifted it to my lips, savoring the warmth, believing that Riley's email would be another routine update on guest counts or travel itineraries. I'd already arranged everything. Flights, hotels, the extravagant welcome dinner at Lou Jules Verne. $40,000 wired and accounted for. I tapped the trackpad, waited for my mail app to load, and then saw it. A new message from Riley. My heart quickened with anticipation, but when I clicked to open it, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. It began not with a greeting, but a single word, Dad. No, hi, or hello, just the stark salutation, cold and clipped. My pulse slowed as I scrolled. They decided I should join via live stream, because my ex-wife Lizette and the future in-laws thought it'd be intimate. Then came the punchline, the final insult. If you want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Earth window. LOL. I stared at the words, mouth dry, feeling a hollowness spread in my chest. The coffee tasted bitter, as if the beans themselves knew I'd been betrayed. A laugh struggled in my throat, half disbelief, half despair. LOL, she'd written now. A taunt masked his levity. I closed my laptop and traced a finger over the tabletop. I thought of every cheesy Hallmark moment I'd orchestrated for her. Homemade birthday cakes that collapsed, science fair presentations built from cardboard and glitter, late nights spent quizzing her on algebra until she finally laughed and hugged me. And now? All that effort reduced to pixels on a screen I would never see up close. The room started to tilt, but I held on to the edge of the table. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder that the world outside had not paused for my heartbreak. Instead of responding with anger or sadness, I opened a blank reply and typed 4 words, sure. Enjoy your big day. I hit send, feeling the click echo in my mind like a verdict. No more pleading. No more excuses. Final. I closed the lid of the laptop and stood, moving almost on autopilot to the door. My reflection in the foyer mirror caught me mid-stride. A man in his mid-50s with graying temples, shoulders slightly stooped, eyes that once shone with pride now shadowed with betrayal. I shook my head, stepped outside, and drove to Crestview Bank. Inside the bank, Mr. Alston looked up from his desk with a welcoming smile that faltered when he saw the steel in my gaze. He'd been managing the wedding account since Riley announced her engagement. I told him I wanted to cancel the next wire transfer. All $60,000 reserved for the venue, the florist, the photographer. He leaned forward, eyebrows raised in disbelief. That's scheduled to go out tomorrow, he said, clicking through the ledger. I nodded and gave him the account number. It was never about the money, I said quietly. It was about being present. He hesitated, then picked up the phone to authorize the cancellation. I left the bank feeling unburdened, though my knuckles were white around the steering wheel. Back at my apartment, 12 missed calls blinked on my phone. Riley, Lizette, Malcolm. My daughter's ex-in-law's number scrolled in too. I didn't return a single one. Their voicemails piled up. Please, apologies, demands. Dad, it's not what you think. Dad, please just wire the money so we can get this sorted. Dad, you're acting crazy. I deleted each message without listening. I poured a drink, an aged single malt that Lizette insisted I'd ruin if I didn't learn to appreciate, and walked down to the riverbank. The water ran cold and steady, reflecting the bright spring sky. I thought of coaching Riley's soccer team, seeing her grin after she scored her first goal. I remembered tucking her in after nightmare-fueling thunderstorms, whispering that she was safe. And now the best gift I'd ever given her was deemed disposable by the people she loves most. Later, Malcolm arrived, unannounced and entitled. He breezed into my foyer as if nothing had changed since 2009, when we were a picture-perfect family. He gestured at the half-empty glass in my hand. This is going to ruin everything, you know, he said, voice low. The caterer's threatening to walk. The venue needs final payment. I met his gaze across the coffee table. I wasn't invited, I replied. So I'm not paying. He frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. You're really going to blow up her wedding over an email? I shrugged. I'm not the one who delivered the blow. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a timeline of every contribution, dresses, deposits, dinners, gifts. I printed it out and sent a copy to my lawyer, just in case. On social media, Riley had already posted the Eiffel Tower engagement photo with a passive-aggressive caption about family drama. Comments flooded in. Family is everything. Ignore the haters. Talia, my niece, chided Riley with one pointed question. Didn't your dad pay for the venue? Silence followed. Truth, once shared, scatters illusions like glass in the sun. I didn't reply, didn't comment. I just closed my laptop and listened to the river's steady murmur, realizing that sometimes the line that breaks you also sets you free. I woke the next morning to a quiet apartment, the kind of silence that rattles your chest more than any argument. My coffee machine clicked through its brew cycle, steam rising like a phantom invitation to calm. I stared at the single email still open on my laptop, the cursor blinking like an unanswered challenge. My reply the night before had been terse. Sure, enjoy your big day. And I felt no need to elaborate. Words, after all, had betrayed me already. I took a slow sip, letting the bitter liquid anchor me to the present. The phone lay face up on the table, each missed call flashing like a reproach. 12 from Riley, 3 from Lizette, 1 from Malcolm. I watched the numbers grow in silent accusation, but I did not pick up. If they wanted a response, they'd have to earn it. I left my apartment and drove to the Riverwalk, the same route I'd taken the evening before. The sky was overcast, a pale wash that dulled the city's edges, and I welcomed it. Gray seemed appropriate for grief, and perhaps my anger, too. I passed joggers without recognition, the rhythm of their footsteps mocking in its steadiness. I strutted past the wrought iron benches where I'd once watched Riley chase ducks in her preschool years, her laughter still echoing in my mind. I realized that I'd built so much of my identity around being a father, provider, mentor, coach, and now that identity felt stripped away, exposed. I clenched my jaw, forcing the truth down. Sometimes silence is stronger than explanation. By mid-morning, I found myself at Crestview Bank again, only this time not to cancel wire transfers, but to consult with a financial advisor about reallocating the remaining funds I'd set aside for Riley's wedding. I wasn't punishing my daughter. I was reclaiming my resources. The advisor, a bright-eyed woman named Simone, presented options for growth and diversification, retirement accounts, charitable trusts, even a small education fund for Carter's future. I listened politely, her words drifting around me like confetti in a breeze. My mind rehearsed all the moments I'd coached Riley through math tests, how proud I'd been when she graduated high school with honors. That pride now felt bittersweet, as if it had soured with age. I nodded at Simone's recommendations, but inside I knew my new priority, healing myself. On my way home, I stopped by the soccer fields where I had coached Riley's team. The chain-link fence was empty, goals left unattended, nets sagging in the wind. I climbed over the gate and stood on the cracked asphalt, imagining the roar of children's cheers, the thud of leather against foot, the triumphant grin on Riley's face when she scored her first goal. That memory hurt more than any harsh word. I closed my eyes and let the wind whip through my hair, carrying away the phantom whistles of referees and the collective energy of youth. I realized then that every sideline moment, every halftime pep talk, had shaped me as much as it shaped her. I picked up a stray soccer ball, felt its worn leather under my palm, and then gently set it down again. Some legacies aren't measured in touchdowns or trophies, but in moments of genuine connection. And even if she had tried to erase me, those moments were indelible. The phone calls continued to come, relentless in their repetition. I let them go to voicemail, each one a new plea or accusation. I could almost hear the invisible strings tugging at them. Expectations, guilt, love, tangled together in a knot that none of us could untie so long as we spoke only to demand. I began to draft a letter on my laptop, not to send it, but to empty my mind. I wrote, "Riley, I am hurt. I feel erased. You invited everyone but me. Money cannot substitute presence. I am proud of you, but I refuse to be sidelined in my own life." I reread the words, feeling both relief and futility. What would she do with them? Delete them? Cry? Stonewall me further? I closed the document, saving it only to my desktop where it would gather digital dust, a testament to words spoken too late. That evening, I poured a single glass of scotch, the kind I reserved for nights when sleep felt impossible. I settled into my favorite armchair, its leather worn to a soft sheen from years of use, and stared at the muted television screen. A nature documentary played without sound, lions resting under acacia trees, waves crashing on distant shores. I envied their detachment from human drama. My phone buzzed, a text from Carter. "You okay?" I typed, "I will be," He replied almost immediately with a thumbs-up emoji. His brevity made me smile. I realized that sometimes the strongest support is a silent reassurance, a presence without demands. I lifted my glass, toasting the empty room in the promise of tomorrow's sunrise, convinced that one day my voice would matter more than any transfer or text. For now, silence was enough. I unlocked my apartment door to a barrage of frantic blinking lights. Voicemails piled up faster than I could count. 12 from Riley, each one more desperate, 3 from Lizette, her tone shifting from hurt to accusation, and 1 from Malcolm, sounding rehearsed and resentful. My chest tightened as I stepped inside. The front hall littered with envelopes I hadn't opened, bills I'd forgotten, reminders of routines I no longer cared about. I paused at the threshold, phone clutched in one hand and keys in the other, and let the hallway's quiet wash over me. For a moment, I considered answering one of those calls, telling someone why I'd canceled the final installment for the Paris venue, why I'd refused to play the part of the doting, ever-compliant father. But the words drifted away as I closed the door behind me, sealing off their expectations like a tidal wave held back by a flimsy seawall. I slipped off my coat and tossed it over a chair, boots thudding against the hardwood floor. My eyes landed on the wedding planning binder perched on the coffee table, its pages bulging with contracts, mood boards, seating charts, and photos of white roses. I'd kept it intact after the email arrived, too sentimental to shred but too painful to ignore. I drummed my fingers against the wood, recalling the hours I spent poring over lace samples with Lizette, the phone calls with wedding planners in Paris time zones, the meticulous calculations to stretch every dollar of my savings. Now those memories felt surreal, like scenes from someone else's life. I sank onto the couch, phone buzzing again, and let the machine handle the calls. I reached for my glass of scotch on the end table, the amber liquid glowing under the lamp's halo. One sip warmed my throat, reminding me of late nights when Lizette and I would joke about growing old together, our wedding anniversary a sacred date I marked on my calendar each year. Now the flame of that partnership had flickered out, leaving only embers of disappointment and regret. Across the room, family pictures stared back at me. Riley's graduation photo, beaming beside her proud mother. Carter's childhood portrait, a sandy-haired boy clutching a baseball mitt. A family Christmas snapshot, forced smiles frozen in time. I stood and moved toward them, fingertips brushing the glass of each frame. I remembered sculpting gingerbread houses with Lizette during our first married Christmas, Riley's laughter echoing through the kitchen as she collapsed hers mid-construction. Those moments were indelible, yet here I was, as Lizette's attorney bluntly called me in a voicemail, a deadbeat by design. They'd reduced years of love and sacrifice to that label, as if my identity lay in the cancellations and transactions they demanded. I rummaged through the coffee table drawer and pulled out an old, leather-bound journal, the one I kept when I coached Riley's under-10 soccer team. I flipped through pages covered in scrawled practice drills, pep talk notes, and reflections on parenting. One entry caught my eye. The day she scored her first hat trick, and I wrote how proud I was, more proud than I thought possible. The ink had faded, but the sentiment remained intact. I closed the journal and held it to my chest, feeling the weight of joy and disappointment intertwined. My phone buzzed again, a new text from Riley. I debated reading it, but then swiped up. "Dad, please. Just tell me what you need. We can fix this." I stared at the words, heart clenched in anger and sorrow. Fix this. As if the thousands of dollars already sent were a sick joke, and now I owed them one more debt, forgiveness. I typed no and pressed send, my finger hovering over the delete key as if I could obliterate the digital reminder of her plea. The apartment felt cluttered with expectations I no longer wanted to carry. I stood, grabbed my coat, and decided to clear my head with a walk. Outside, the late afternoon air was crisp, carrying the smell of rain from the river. I walked without direction, boots splashing through puddles as city sounds drifted around me, distant sirens, the hum of traffic, a dog barking. They felt like a chorus of practical demands. Pay this, respond to that, be available for them. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the cacophony. Eventually, I found myself at a small, unassuming park bench overlooking the river. I sat and watched the current swirl around rocks and fallen branches. The water's persistence reminded me that life moves forward regardless of our grief. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, the ledger of payments I'd printed the day before. I unfolded it carefully, reading line after line. $10,000 for the dress, $5,500 for photography, $15,000 for the reception deposit, and so on. At the bottom, a blank space where the final $60,000 would have been recorded. I crumpled the paper into a ball and dropped it into the river's flow. It floated for a moment, then sank, swallowed by the current. Watching it disappear gave me a strange, fierce satisfaction, like ripping off a bandage or breaking a chain. I lingered on the bench until dusk tinged the sky with lavender, then rose and walked back to my apartment. Inside, the silence greeted me like an old friend. I flicked on the lamp, pulled the couch cushions aside, and retrieved my journal. I opened a fresh page and wrote, "Today, I let go of their debts. Tomorrow, I will reclaim my own worth." I paused, pen hovering, and then sketched a simple line drawing of a sunset over water, a promise of new beginnings. By the time I closed the journal, the phone lay face down with 10 more missed calls. I did not care. I poured another scotch and settled into my armchair, legs crossed, shoulders unburdened for the first time in weeks. I lifted the glass and whispered into the quiet room, to freedom, and for once, I meant it. I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my window, each drop a tiny percussion that echoed the heartbeat in my chest. The previous days had blurred together, a tangle of phone calls and canceled transactions, but today felt different. Today, I would face the aftermath. I poured coffee into a travel mug and headed out, raincoat buttoned tight, to the florist shop on Main Street. There, beneath the matted awning, stood two women arguing in hushed tones over a ledger of unpaid invoices. Their faces were worn, their expressions pinched, victims, it seemed, of my daughter's grand plans unraveling. I stepped forward, clearing my throat, and offered a firm handshake. "Let me make this right," I said. They exchanged glances, suspicion flickering in their eyes. I slid my card across the counter and covered the full balance. Gratitude shone on their faces, but I sensed an unspoken question. Was this relief or collateral gratitude bought at my expense? Walking away, the rain tapered off, leaving a fragile stillness in its wake. I cradled the mug and watched steam curl skyward. The florist's door chimed behind me as I left, evidence that my money, once siloed for celebration, was now a salve on other people's wounds. I didn't regret it. I believed in fairness. But I hated that my daughter's mistakes had forced these strangers to scramble for payments that should have never been in question. As I made my way down the sidewalk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was holding two contradictory truths, that I cared deeply for Riley, yet refused to fund my own erasure. By midday, I found myself at the restaurant where the caterer had been canceled. The line cook inside leaned on the counter, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than worried. When he spotted me, his posture shifted, equal parts relief and irritation. "You're the ghost wire, I take it?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. I nodded. "I'm the ghost wire." I paid the final catering invoice, then added a gratuity large enough to soften their losses. The manager offered a tight smile. "We'll keep the deposit on file," she said, "in case you want to come back for dinner sometime." I agreed, promising a future reservation I might never make. I walked out feeling hollow, like a man who'd charged a toll for emotions he could no longer feel. The rest of the afternoon I spent drafting a letter to each vendor, the photographer, the band, the rental company. I typed with deliberate care, explaining that funds had been reallocated and offering apologies that felt sincere but insufficient. I printed the letters and mailed them along with checks to cover every outstanding balance. As I sealed the envelopes, I realized I was desperate to untangle myself from the obligation of performance. The father who gave without question, now the father who reclaimed boundaries. The irony was sharp, like biting into a lemon rind. That evening, I returned home to find a voicemail from Carter. He sounded tentative, as if walking on fragile ice. "Dad, thanks for sorting the florist," he said. "Mom called. She's furious, but the florists are calming her, so thanks." His relief was audible. For a moment, I felt a flicker of connection. Proof that my actions, though forced by pain, could still hold meaning for someone who mattered. I replied with a simple text. I did what needed doing. No apologies, no invitations to explain further. Just a statement of fact. Carter responded with a thumbs-up emoji. It was enough. Later, after dinner, I logged into my daughter's wedding website to see if any of the live stream links had been generated. There was nothing, no updates, no links, no messages. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of absence settle over me. The money I'd disbursed on their behalf felt like lifeboats launched for a ship I no longer wanted to board. I thought of Riley standing at the altar in Paris, oblivious to the chaos her message had unleashed back home. If she watched at all, she watched a scene devoid of me, my presence reduced to zeros in a bank statement. I reached for my journal and wrote, "Today I freed them from my obligations so that someday, if they choose, they can see what they lost." The words came out hard, jagged, but they shone with clarity. I closed the journal and turned off the lamp, leaving the room in half-light. Outside, the rain had returned, a steady curtain that seemed to wash away what remained of my anger. Before sleep, I checked my email one last time. There was an unread message from Riley's fiancé, Andre, subject line, "Thank you." I opened it with caution. He wrote, "Your generosity to the vendors means a lot. Riley is upset, but she's asking why you did it. I wish she understood you better." I stared at the words, the question mark hanging between us like a fragile truce. I typed back, "Ask her yourself." Then I deleted the draft and closed the laptop. In the quiet that followed, I felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve. Collateral gratitude can't buy genuine connection, but it can remind both giver and receiver that responsibility, real responsibility, matters more than affection bought or begged. And with that thought, I finally let the day end. The phone rang twice before I silenced it, letting Andre's number slip into voicemail with the same deliberate calm I'd used to cancel the Paris wire transfer. I imagined him standing in a vast hall dripping with crystal chandeliers and white orchids, thinking each ring would coax me back into the role of dutiful father. Instead, I listened to the distant hum of the city through my apartment window and let the message go unanswered. Later, his email arrived. "Dear Mr. Jameson, we're very sorry if there was a misunderstanding." The words danced on my screen as though they'd been written by someone else's hand. Inadequate apologies masquerading as cordiality, all while the wound in my chest ached from being sidelined. I clicked the message open, reading and rereading each clause as if it might rearrange itself into genuine remorse. It didn't. So I pressed delete, watching the apology vanish into the void between mail servers. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded behind my head, and stared at the ceiling as memories of past traditions flooded in. I remembered the first time I met Lizette's grandmother in her cramped kitchen in New Jersey, the warm scent of yeast from bread baking in the oven, the laughter that bubbled over as she told me about each family recipe she'd passed down. I recalled how, when Riley was born, I'd inherited a faded photo album full of wedding pictures, my parents on their own big day, Lizette's aunt in a seafoam green dress, the hesitant smile of a teenage cousin making awkward eye contact with the camera. These traditions had meant something, symbols of continuity and belonging. And yet, now my own daughter was rewriting the script without me. I rose, walked past the plastered walls of framed memories, and opened my laptop's file explorer. There, in the same folder as Riley_soccer_2010 JPG and Europe_vacation 2015 MOV, lay wedding and final.pdf. I clicked it open and watched the detailed spreadsheet unfold. Line by line, payment by payment, each figure a testament to the countless conversations I'd had with planners, tailors, and designers. $10,000 for the couture gown I hadn't even chosen. Lizette had surprised Riley with that. $5,500 for the photographer whose portfolio Riley had scrolled through until 2 in the morning. $15,000 for the reception deposit on a terrace overlooking the Seine. I traced the numbers with my eye, chest tightening like a vice in recognition of every sacrifice I'd made. For decades, I'd banked not just money but goodwill, transacting affection in installments, believing that love could be measured in deposits and invoices. With a decisive click, I hit print. The printer word, coughing out pages stained with ink and intent. I gathered the stack and the accompanying contracts, vendor agreements, timeline sketches, seating charts, and stuffed them into a manila envelope. I scribbled my lawyer's address on the front. Attention, David Ramirez, remembering how, even as a child, I'd found comfort in the precision of ink on paper. The weight of the envelope felt substantial in my hands, a physical representation of boundaries being drawn. As I sealed it, I felt a shift, as though the barrier between father and financier was finally fixed in place. Standing by the window, I held the envelope up to the light and remembered my own parents' wedding day, the lace veil that had belonged to my grandmother, the soft hymns resonating through the church nave, the community of neighbors who'd brought casseroles afterward. I thought about how weddings were rituals rooted in collective memory and collective investment, not only the money that filled gilded goblets, but also the presents that filled empty chairs. I closed my eyes and let the irony settle. I had funded those chairs, yet I would not occupy one. I dropped the envelope into the mailbox on the corner, feeling the click as it slipped into the slot. The midday sun glinted off the brass plaque of the community post office, Montclair branch. I walked back along the sidewalk, taking in the bustle, families pushing strollers, baristas calling out names over the hiss of espresso machines, children rushing past me with grease-stained pizza boxes. Life continued in its small, relentless motions, indifferent to my personal upheaval. Yet each step reminded me that transactions, whether financial or emotional, carried consequences. My refusal to fund Riley's wedding was not vengeance. It was a boundary I needed to reclaim. Back in my apartment, the phone lay silent, no new voicemails blinking. I settled at the desk and opened a fresh document titled Terms of Engagement. I wrote, in clear, measured sentences, I will no longer serve as guarantor for any wedding expenses. I have fulfilled my commitment through $40,000 in prior payments. Any further funding must be the result of direct invitation, extended in gratitude, not as an expectation. Should arrangements be made to include me genuinely, I will consider participation under mutually respectful terms. I saved the file, not intending to send it, but as a manifesto of my dignity, a private acknowledgement that traditions were worth preserving only when they honored all parties equally. That evening, I took out the small silver locket Riley had given me on Father's Day years ago. It contained a photograph of her at age 7, grinning shyly at the camera, hair pulled back in pigtails. I held it against my heart, recalling the pulse I once shared with her, strong, unbroken. I whispered into the quiet room, traditions matter, but not if they come at the cost of my self-respect. I clipped the locket into place and stood by the window, watching lights blink on in neighboring apartments. Soon, Paris would light up for Riley's ceremony, candles flickering behind stained glass windows. I wondered if she would remember that every light cast a shadow, and that absence, too, carried a certain brilliance. I turned away and poured a glass of whiskey, savoring the burn as it traced down my throat. I thought of toasts yet unspoken and futures unwritten. And then I sat at my desk, pen in hand, ready to chart the next chapter in a story that no longer required me to foot the bill for my own erasure. I opened Facebook the way I once opened holiday cards, eager for warmth and goodwill, only to be blindsided by a sting. There, in my feed, was Riley's post. A photograph of her and Andre standing beneath the Eiffel Tower at dusk, auburn lights framing their silhouettes like a fairy tale backdrop. She smiled radiantly, clutching his arm, her veil drifting behind her like a moonlit curtain. The caption read, "Trying to stay positive despite family drama, broken hearts. Some people just don't know how to be happy for others." My chest tightened, a fist of embarrassment and sorrow squeezing my heart. The word drama hovered in my mind, echoing with all the weight of her disappointment. I scrolled down, bracing myself for the tide of comments. Faux sympathy, snide remarks, misguided solidarity. They poured in like rain. "Ignore the haters," someone wrote. "Your real family is those who support you. People who care only about money aren't worthy of celebration." I looked at each response, realizing that my personal war was now a public spectacle. My private anguish, my failure to be both father and financier, had become fodder for strangers. Even supportive comments felt hollow, an online veneer that could be withdrawn with a single click. I closed the browser, heart pounding, and stared at the blank wall opposite my desk. How had this become a story for the internet to dissect? A chime notified me of a new comment from my niece Talia. "Wait, didn't your dad pay for the venue?" The subtext was as loud as a verdict. Silence followed, a tumbleweed rolling through the virtual comments section. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could type something, an explanation, a defense, a plea for empathy, but every word felt inadequate, every sentence an echo of old arguments. So I didn't reply. Instead, I shut the laptop with a soft click and rose from my chair. I paced the length of my apartment, walls adorned with photographs of better times. Riley in her soccer uniform, grinning with scraped knees and medals dangling from her neck. Family vacations in the Alps, laughter suspended in midair like crystal snowflakes. Carter learning to ride a bike, my hands steadying him as he wobbled away. Each image was a testament to presence, to being there when it mattered. Now, Those moments felt like artifacts from another life, priceless, yet irrelevant to the narrative my daughter had chosen to share with the world. I poured a glass of scotch, the amber liquid swirling in the nightlight. I took a sip and felt its warmth unfurl in my chest, steadying the storm inside. I thought about reputation, the fragile construct built from others' perceptions. As a father, I built mine on reliability, steady provider, unwavering supporter. But now I was reduced to a punching bag for internet trolls and sideways glances. Public relations, I realized, had its own brutal logic. Narratives skewed by selective edits, truths buried beneath layers of half-truths and innuendo. My shame felt magnified. Each broadcasted slight a spotlight on my flaws. I sank into the armchair by the window, gazing at the city lights that flickered like distant stars. The world outside was indifferent to my pain. Traffic hummed below, windows lit in neighboring buildings, lives unfolding without regard for my fractured family. In that moment, I envied their distance, their lack of entanglement in my drama. And yet, I felt tethered to it, every comment a ballast dragging me further into despair. My phone buzzed, a text from Lizette. I hesitated before reading. Her message said, "This is ridiculous. You're making this a circus." I stared at the words, the familiar sting of her disappointment sharper than any online barb. I placed the phone face down and turned away. I wasn't about to let her version of events dictate my next move. I needed clarity, not condemnation. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down the leather-bound journal I'd used since Carter was a toddler. I opened to the next blank page and wrote, "Public shame is a mirror held up by strangers. Their reflections are not mine." I closed the journal, letting the weight of that statement settle. It was a truth I could hold on to, a defense against the torrent of opinion. I decided then to reclaim my narrative in a way that didn't rely on social media. I put on my coat and stepped into the night, the cool air a balm on my heated skin. I walked to the community center where I volunteered as a youth mentor. The building was dark, but I knew the hallway by memory. I found the notice board where I'd pinned flyers for the upcoming fall soccer season. I ran my finger over the edges of the paper, rugged goals by lunchtime, growth through teamwork, and felt a pang of loss. But also resolve. I had built something real here, young lives shaped by genuine attention and care. This was my real legacy, not the fleeting opinions of online strangers. I retrieved the sign-up sheet and scribbled my name as coordinator for the new season, then taped it back in place. My reflection in the glass door looked worn but determined. I turned and walked back out, each step lighter than the last. In the quiet of the night, I felt a flicker of hope. That beyond the digital chatter lay real relationships waiting to be nurtured. That I could step off the stage of public spectacle and return to the spaces where my presence mattered most. When I returned home, I logged into Facebook one last time to edit my privacy settings, limited profile, restricted comments, a digital moat around my life. I unfriended a few voices I no longer recognized or respected. Then I closed the app and slid the phone into a drawer. Silence greeted me, vast and empty, but not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that permits reflection, the kind where true presence can grow. I poured another scotch, raised my glass to the darkened screen, and whispered, "This is how I begin again." And in that act of digital withdrawal, I found a fragment of peace, one step toward reclaiming my story, one step toward mending what truly mattered. I woke the next morning to sunlight slanting through the curtains, painting golden bars across my bedroom floor. The weight of the previous week's drama felt heavier in daylight, each ray a spotlight on unmet expectations. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, thumb hovering over Riley's name in the recent calls list. My finger hovered, then withdrew. I was done with reactive impulses. Instead, I dialed Carter's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad." His voice was cautious, as though he sensed the tension I carried. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Can you come by? There's something I need to tell you." He arrived around 10, dressed in a gray hoodie and jeans, eyes rimmed with concern. He carried 2 cups of coffee from our favorite cafe, black with just a hint of sugar, placing one in my hand before settling on the couch. "Thought you might need this," he said. I nodded, savoring the warmth. For a moment, we sat in silence, each of us listening to the hum of the city beyond the window. Finally, I exhaled. "Your sister told you something?" I began softly. Carter ran a hand through his sandy hair and met my gaze. "She did," he admitted. "A few weeks ago. She said she didn't want you there." said it'd be awkward with Mom. His admission hit me like a punch to the gut, less because of what he'd heard and more because he hadn't told me sooner. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, voice hushed but firm. "I thought she'd change her mind," he said, looking down at his coffee cup. "I didn't want to cause more trouble." I shook my head, a slow, deliberate motion. "But you kept silent when I was gearing up to be there, to celebrate her," I said. "All these wires, these plans, it was all contingent on me being part of it." Carter pressed his lips together, guilt shadowing his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. I thought she'd realize how important it was." I reached across and squeezed his shoulder. "I know you did, and I love you for that. But we've got to be honest with each other, even when it hurts." Carter nodded, relief and regret mingling in his expression. I took a sip of coffee, then continued. "I don't blame you. I blame the situation. And ultimately, I blame Riley for rewriting reality without telling me." I tilted my head toward the window. "You know, when you're a kid, you believe your family is unbreakable, safe, predictable." She shattered that. Carter's brow furrowed. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. I stared out at the neighborhood below, parents walking kids to school, elderly couples on morning strolls, life unfolding in orderly routines. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I refuse to be an ATM for a family that sees me as optional." A flicker of pride passed through Carter's eyes. "That's brave," he said. "Not many people draw a line like that." I smiled wryly. "Brave or stubborn? Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." He shifted on the couch, leaning forward. "You're not alone, Dad," he said. "I'm here. And I think a few of her friends, Ava, Simone, they're asking why you're not in the pictures." I raised an eyebrow. "Those girls she's been friends with since childhood?" Carter nodded. "Yeah, they like you. They were mad when they heard you were cut out. You didn't know, but some of them tried to slip you an invite anyway." My heart thudded at the thought. Allies in an unexpected quarter. I thought of Ava, Riley's roommate at Boston University, always quick with a smile and a witty comment. And Simone, her childhood friend who'd stayed local. They'd known I funded the venue. They must have felt the sting alongside me. I folded my arms, considering. Maybe I should reach out to them, I mused. Carter shrugged. "Couldn't hurt. They might even give you the live stream link." A laugh escaped me. "At this point, I don't care about the link." I paused, voice softening. "I care about the truth. About knowing someone sees me as more than a bank account." Carter leaned back, folding his arms. "You've always been more than that to me," he said. "I don't need a ceremony to prove it." The room filled with the silent hum of understanding, two men bonded by blood and honesty, navigating a rift that felt cavernous but maybe, just maybe, bridgeable. I took another sip of coffee, feeling its warmth spread through me. "Thank you, Carter," I said, "for telling me the truth." His shoulders relaxed, and he smiled. "Always, Dad." We spent the next hour going through old photo albums, laughing at mismatched outfits and awkward haircuts. Carter pointed out my worst dad jokes. "Remember when you tried to teach me the chicken dance and fell over?" And I countered with stories of his stubbornness at age 6, refusing to brush his teeth. By the time he left, the apartment felt lighter, like the first breeze after a storm. That evening, I drafted a brief email to Ava and Simone, thanking them for their past kindness and explaining my current decision. I kept it simple. "I understand Riley wants an intimate ceremony, but if any of you have access to the live stream, please send me the link. I value your friendship and your honesty." I hesitated, then hit send. The next morning, I woke to 2 replies. Ava's message said, "I'm so sorry you've been treated this way. Here's the link. Wish you were here in person." Simone's read, "Dad, she can't keep excluding you. You have every right to be there. Call me if you need to talk." I felt a lump in my throat, a mixture of gratitude and pain. The inclusion I craved came from the margins of Riley's circle, not from Riley herself. I stared at the screen, heart swelling. The line between son and father had shifted today. Carter's honesty had illuminated a path I didn't know existed. It wasn't a resolution, but it was progress. As I watched the live stream link begin to buffer, I realized that family isn't confined to DNA or ceremonies. Sometimes, it's forged in the crucible of conflict, distilled by truth and sustained by the ones brave enough to speak it. And in that moment, surrounded by genuine allies, I felt whole enough to watch, or not, on my own terms. I should have known she'd come, but the knock still reverberated through my quiet apartment like a challenge. It was late afternoon. Rain from earlier had left the sidewalks glistening and the air heavy with damp earth. I had just settled into my favorite armchair with a worn copy of Camus, the soft hum of city life filtering through the half-open window. When I heard the 3 sharp taps, my heart kicked into a gallop. Lisette, I realized, had come back into my world. I rose, smoothing my shirt, and crossed the hardwood floor to the door. I peered through the peephole and saw her standing there. Hair curled into that familiar cascade she wore when she wanted to look effortless, perfume trailing her like a promise. Her expression was carefully neutral, as though she had rehearsed every possible greeting and settled on something between regret and resolve. I opened the door. The scent hit me immediately, jasmine and sandalwood, a reminder of the linen spray she used on our wedding sheets. The contrast between her composed demeanor and the turmoil I felt inside was stark. She took a careful step forward, as though entering foreign territory, and tried a tentative smile. "I don't want things to be ugly between us," she said, her voice soft but firm. The words hung in the narrow hallway, where once our daughter had bounced through wearing mismatched socks, calling us to breakfast. I felt the memory tug at me. A part of me wanted to welcome her back into that warmth, but another part recoiled at the hurt she'd helped inflict. I crossed my arms. "Then maybe you shouldn't have excluded me from our daughter's wedding," I replied, keeping my tone even. I refused to let the tremor in my voice betray how deeply those words had cut. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, as if she weighed my accusation against her own narrative. She lifted a hand in a dismissive gesture. "You're punishing Riley. You're hurting your own child." The familiar guilt trip settled in my chest like a stone. I remembered all the times she'd used our daughter as leverage. When she wanted extra support during custody hearings, or when she threatened to withhold visitation. But this time, I refused to be manipulated. I stepped back to let her into the apartment. "No, Lisette," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'm just refusing to keep paying to be invisible." The hallway felt colder once she stepped inside, the walls echoing with the absence she had created. She blinked at me, her expression flickering through surprise, hurt, confusion. I could almost hear her mind racing, searching for her next line. She pursed her lips, as if tasting something sour. Silence stretched between us, taut and electric. She crossed to the living room and dropped onto the sofa, folding her legs beneath her. Her posture was defensive, yet she kept her gaze on me. I leaned against the doorframe, hands in my pockets, and watched her. The lines of her face were softer now than they had been when we were married, yet her eyes still held that fierce clarity, the same clarity that once made me fall in love with her. I remembered our first date at that French bistro, the way her laughter had filled the room, how I felt at home in a world of chaos. Now, her laughter felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she asked, voice low. Her words were coated in pain, but beneath that pain lay anger. I took a breath. "Yes, I realized," I said. "I realized the moment I read that email. I realized every time I checked my phone for a message from our daughter and found only reminders of a live stream. I realized every time I looked at those wedding plans and saw my name attached to deposits, but not to an invitation." My words tumbled out, unhurried but deliberate, as if I were cataloging each transgression for my own clarity. She sat up, hands clasped in her lap. "I thought it was best for everyone," she said. "I thought we'd moved past the drama and wanted a peaceful ceremony." Her gaze flicked away, toward the window where gray clouds gathered. "It was always about drama with you," she added softly. "You need to make everything a conflict." I felt the old frustration rise in my chest, the frustration that had once driven me to late-night arguments and silent treatments. But this time, I chose something different. "I'm tired of being the villain in your story," I said. "Tired of having my motives twisted into something ugly. I gave $40,000 because I love my daughter. But love isn't measured in bank transfers. It's measured in presence, in shared moments. You and Riley decided I wasn't worth seeing in person, and that hurt more than any argument could." My voice cracked on the last phrase, the admission of hurt raw, honest. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. When I opened them, Lisette was watching me. Her eyes were glossy, and I could see tears threatening to spill. That hurt me in a way I hadn't expected. Despite everything, she was the mother of my child. A part of me loved her still, but I couldn't let that love blind me to what she'd done. I wish you had told me how you felt, I continued quietly. If Riley was uncomfortable, you could have talked to me. We could have found a compromise. But you made a choice without me. You erased me. She swallowed, blinking hard. I was trying to protect Riley, she whispered. The siege mentality in her words revealed the real fracture, fear of conflict. Protect her, I echoed. By excluding her father? I shook my head. You're not protecting anyone by building walls. You're just hiding from responsibility. And now everyone's in crisis because no one thought to communicate. She looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, as though she were folding in on herself. I'm sorry for how it happened, she said, voice trembling. But you don't have to withdraw completely. You could have talked to me. I sighed, feeling a melancholy softness wash over me. I tried, I said. I reached out. I asked you directly, and you ignored me. So I withdrew money instead. I paused, letting the truth settle. I'm not proud of it, I added softly. But I refuse to continue paying for a role I'm not allowed to play. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks now. I stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, but neither did she lean in. I know you didn't send that email, Riley and Andre did. But you wield it, I said. You used it to justify decisions that hurt me deeply. She nodded, her breathing shaky. I see that now, she whispered. I should have listened. The confession hung between us, fragile as a thawing icicle. We stood in silence for a long moment, the rain beginning again outside, tapping against the window with hesitant rhythm. The sound felt like tentative dialogue between sky and earth, two of us trying to reconnect. I removed my hand from her shoulder and took a step back. I need time, I said. I need to see that things are different before I show up again. The admission was heavy, but necessary. I could no longer rush healing. She stood, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. I understand, she said. Her voice was small, but genuine. She crossed to the door, paused, and turned. Thank you for hearing me, she added softly. Then she stepped out into the corridor. I watched her retreat until the door clicked shut. In the sudden hush, I felt the apartment exhale with me, as though relieved that the confrontation was over, but uncertain of what came next. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the grain of the wood through my shirt. The rain pattered across the roof, each drop a reminder that reconciliation, like storms, can clear the air but leave the ground sodden. I walked to the window and watched the city blur beneath the downpour. Somewhere in Paris, Riley was saying her vows, unaware of the reality at home. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Today, I had drawn a boundary. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to mend the breach or let it define us. But for now, I allowed myself the quiet victory of having spoken my truth and listened to hers, an exchange long overdue. The morning light filtered through the blinds in lazy strips, illuminating motes of dust that floated like tiny specters in my apartment. The phone buzzed against the coffee table, a muffled drumbeat demanding my attention. I glanced at the screen, Riley, her number blinking insistently, and felt the familiar twinge of guilt poke at my chest. But I was still perched on the edge of autonomy, unwilling to succumb to the automated rituals she demanded. I picked up my cup, inhaled the rich aroma of dark roast, and let the vibration fade without moving to answer. I had learned, painfully, that answering meant reopening old wounds. So I kept still, listening to the soft hiss of the coffee maker as it completed its cycle, letting Riley's unreturned calls stack up like fallen dominoes along the hallway rug. Carter joined me in the kitchen, still half-dressed in a charcoal sweatshirt, hair rumpled from sleep. He poured himself a cup and regarded me with that mixture of concern and admiration I'd come to rely on. You're not going to pick up? He asked quietly. I shook my head, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug, cool despite the steaming liquid inside. Not today, I said, voice steady. He measured the pause, then nodded, sitting on the counter. She'll keep trying, he said, reaching for a donut. But maybe she'll realize how serious you are. His words carried the weight of loyalty, and I felt both strength and sorrow in their conviction. I hope so, I murmured. The calls ended, the phone fell silent, and the apartment seemed too large without the echo of Riley's voice. I brewed a second pot of coffee and paced the living room, my thoughts ricocheting between pride in my boundary and aching for reconciliation. I thought of all the mornings spent making pancakes in this very kitchen, Riley's laughter rising like steam above the griddle. Each sizzle reminded me of innocence lost, of rituals discarded by an email so cold it might as well have been typed on a tombstone. I inhaled deeply, wanting the bitterness of the coffee to mask the bitterness of my memories. Around noon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The city was alive with midday energy, vendors hawking homemade tamales, children laughing in a playground across the street, buskers strumming guitars on the corner. Their joy felt incongruous to my mood, like colorful confetti mocking my solemn procession. Yet I pressed on, winding through tree-lined avenues, letting the city's pulse steady my own. My phone buzzed again, multiple texts from Riley. "Please just talk to me. I'm sorry. We can fix this." Each one arrived in jagged bursts, an electronic plea for presence. I silenced the notifications and tucked the phone into my pocket. In my mind, I repeated the silent refrain. Respect my terms or lose me altogether. By mid-afternoon, I found myself at the small cafe where Lizette and I had once shared croissants before work. The place had changed, new baristas, new menu items, but the window bench remained. I sat there, tracing the etched initials couples had carved into the wood over decades. I remembered the hush of early mornings when the world felt ambivalent to our troubles. Today, I felt a counterfeit calm, a detachment forged by necessity. I ordered a latte and nursed it slowly, watching the steam curl into the air as if dancing away from reality. My reprieve was interrupted by a familiar ringtone, the cafe's intercom announcing a phone call. I reached for my device to see Andre's name. He was Riley's fiancé, the architect of her estrangement. My chest fluttered with a mix of dread and defiance. I let the call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear his practiced apologies. A minute later, his voice filled the silence. "Mr. Jameson, I'm sorry to bug you again, but the caterer has rescheduled and needs confirmation. Please return my call." His tone was polite, bordering on pleading. I bit my lip, not out of hunger but frustration. I lifted my cup, took a sip, then set it down. I would not be dragged back into negotiations for my own exclusion. I left a generous tip and stepped out into the crisp air. The sky had darkened with gathering clouds, hinting at rain. I walked toward the riverbank, boots crunching over fallen leaves. I paused by an old bench overlooking the water, its backrest etched with decades of names, couples, families, strangers marking moments. I sat and watched the current glide by, unhurried and untroubled. It struck me that life, like the river, belonged to its own rhythm, indifferent to our demands. I folded my hands in my lap and closed my eyes, willing the pummeling silence to speak wisdom. After a long moment, I opened them and reached for the phone again. This time, instead of Riley or Andre, I dialed Lizette's number, her voicemail greeting still familiar, tinged with that same gentle annoyance I knew so well. I left a carefully measured message. "Lizette, this is just to let you know I won't be funding or participating in any wedding-related arrangements. I've canceled all future transfers. If Riley or Andre need anything further, they can deal with me directly. I hope you both find peace with your decisions. Goodbye." I hung up and placed the phone back in my pocket, feeling an unexpected calm settle over me. I had spoken my truth aloud for the first time in days. The sky opened then, a sudden drizzle turning into a steady rain. I stayed on the bench, raindrops dancing around me, each one a reminder that release often arrives on the heels of discomfort. I felt the rain soak through my coat, chilled to the bone, and yet I didn't move. The world soaked me, cleansed me in small droplets. I raised my face, letting a single raindrop roll down my cheek. It tasted like freedom. When I finally stood, I brushed rainwater from my sleeves and walked back home with a lighter step. The apartment welcomed me with its quiet embrace, the smell of brewed coffee lingering like an unspoken promise. I placed my phone on the table, its screen dark, untouched. I poured a fresh cup and settled into my armchair. In that space between sips, between past hurt and future possibility, I felt something stir, a fragile hope that silence, at last, might be loud enough to reshape our story. I closed my eyes, savoring the warmth, and whispered into the empty room, "I won't apologize for being invisible any longer." And this time, I believed it. I booked the flight to Santorini on a whim, craving an expanse of blue that might wash away the confusion choking my life in Montclair. As the plane lifted off, I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, watching the patchwork of neighborhoods shrink into a mosaic of rooftops and winding streets. Each dollar spent on this escape felt like a reclaiming of self. money redirected from a wedding that never welcomed me to a journey that would. The tremor in my chest steadied as I surrendered to the hum of engines and the slow climb toward the clouds. When we descended into the Cycladic air, it was late afternoon, and the island lay bathed in golden light. I felt the warmth on my face as I stepped from the terminal, the scent of bougainvillea and salt carried on a gentle breeze. I hailed a taxi to my villa, leaving behind snow-tipped peaks and suburban routines for a whitewashed house perched on a cliff overlooking the Aegean. In the driver's rearview mirror, I caught my reflection, eyes softened by relief, shoulders lowered by release. I realized I had begun to breathe again. Inside the villa, the space was minimal: stone floors, blue shutters, a small wooden table with a single chair. I set down my bag and crossed to a balcony where the sea stretched infinitely. I took out my phone, opened the email app, and typed a final note to Riley. Hope your live stream still works. Greetings from the real world. No apologies, no invitations, just a reminder that life continued beyond pixels and passwords. I hit send and watched the waves below, impatient for a response I didn't expect. The next morning, I rose before dawn, drawn by the faint glow on the horizon. I wandered along the narrow streets of Oahe, past shuttered shops and sun-bleached walls, a solitary figure against the pastel sky. With each step, I felt the weight of obligation slip away, replaced by the buoyancy of possibility. Children greeted me with curious glances. Locals nodded in quiet greeting. No one asked about my debts or my drama. Here, I was simply a traveler seeking solace. Over the following days, I settled into a rhythm that felt alien and restorative. I woke with the sun, sipped strong Greek coffee from a tiny cup on the terrace, and scribbled in my journal. Love isn't measured in money. It's measured in presence, in shared moments you can't live stream. I revisited the letter to my lawyer, sent the proofs of payment, the outline of my terms, and realized that those words had created space for this escape. They granted me permission to reimagine my relationship with family and finance. One afternoon, I hiked down to Amaudi Bay, the path hugging the cliff's edge, wild thyme scenting the air. I paused halfway, breathless from exertion, and looked back at the village perched above like a fortress of white and blue. I thought of Riley standing at the altar, or rather, not standing there at all, and felt a pang of sadness. Yet beneath it, there was pride that I could step away rather than be complicit in my own erasure. I drank in the view and pressed onward, each footstep a declaration of autonomy. Back at the villa, I hosted a dinner for myself, fresh octopus grilled over charcoal, island salad dripping with olive oil, crusty bread still warm from the oven. I poured a local rose into a tumbler and toasted the empty chair beside me. I spoke aloud. To terms made clear, to boundaries held firm, to love unbought and unforced. The echo of my voice mingled with the distant lapping of water, neither betraying guilt nor boasting victory. It was simply a sound of someone affirming worth. Late that evening, as candles flickered at half-mast under the open sky, my phone buzzed. It was Riley. My heart thudded, not with anticipation, but with calm readiness. I opened the message. Can we talk? I want to understand. I'm so sorry. I stared at the words, the gentle olive branches emerging from a week of silence. I didn't reply immediately. I gazed at the flickering flame of my candle, as if waiting for permission to feel hopeful again. Then I typed, I'm here. On my terms. I slipped the phone into my pocket and leaned back, watching the stars radiate above the swaying bougainvillea. The distance had clarified my priorities, presence over payments, truth over transactions. I thought of the speeches said and unsaid, the toasts given and withheld, and realized that my terms had always been simple: mutual respect, genuine invitation, shared space. Anything less was not a negotiation but a forfeiture of self. The next morning, I walked to a nearby chapel built into the cliff, its white walls gleaming against the blue. Inside, I knelt and offered a private benediction. For my daughter's happiness, for my own healing, for the possibility of reconnection without obligation. I touched the cool stone and whispered, may love always find its way back, but not at the cost of one's dignity. As I rose, light poured through a stained glass window, painting a spectrum of color on the floor. It felt like an affirmation. On my last night in Santorini, I returned to the balcony where my journey began. I opened the window wide, letting the Mediterranean breeze carry away any lingering doubt. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, the scent of salt and jasmine mingling on the air. I held my phone in one hand and imagined Riley's face, uncertain, hopeful, full of apology. I knew we had miles to walk before the gulf between us closed, but for the first time, I believed it could. I opened my eyes and whispered into the night, "This is where my terms end, and our conversation begins." And as the moon rose above the sea, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. A man no longer defined by the finance of family drama, but by the freedom to shape his own story, one deliberate choice at a time.